Chapter 29. Ordie Lee. "That you, Samuel?" Harrison said sharply. "No," a colored man's voice said with a low chuckle. "I ain't Samuel." "Samuel," Harrison hissed in the darkness. His hands wrapped around my arm and pulled me back toward the door we had come through. "Who's hiding in this car with us?" he called out. "Somebody else in here?" "You runaways?" the voice echoed. "You tell us who you are first." Harrison snapped. He took another step backward until our shirt cloth was up against the latched door of the car. Nowhere else to go. We were shut inside the four walls of the whiskey car. "We got a gun and a knife with us. You hear?" Harrison called out, even though we didn't have a thing except Bell's biscuits and turnover pie in our hands. I had a little roll of yarn with the words Chatham, Canada in my pocket. "So you better not give us any trouble." There was quiet. I could hear the other fellow breathing and sniffing loud and clearing his throat. "I sure didn't run all this way from Kentucky to get shot and killed. No, not by two folks same color as me. Who you think you is, anyway?" There was the smell of a candle being lit, and then the sound of shoes shuffling around the barrels. "Let me see what you look like." The fellow that came toward us was just about the tallest black fella I'd ever seen. It looked as if someone had taken his body and stretched it in the middle, like it was a piece of dough, and then taken his arms and his legs and pulled them too. Never seen such long arms and legs on anybody before. "You the ones I've been talking to?" he said, shuffling over, holding up his flickering stub of a candle. He leaned closer. His eyes were big and set far apart, and they stared, checking us over real serious. First Harrison, then me. Then the man's whole face cracked into a crooked grin. "Why, you both runaways too, ain't you?" He shook his finger at Harrison. "You only funnin' with me? Here, I thought you was planning to grind my bones into powder, the way you was soundin'." "You just go back to where you was and leave us be," Harrison snapped. But the fella didn't pay Harrison any mind, and he kept right on talking out loud. "You the first runaways I come across. I'm Ordie Lee. Belong to Master Webster from Maysville, Kentucky. I run off last week, and I've been hopping one car to another trying to get north." He tapped the wall behind us with his knuckles. "You know where we is? We close to Canada? You know anything about how to get up there?" "Hush now," Harrison said sharply. "Folks outside's going to hear you." The man reached into his worn-out coat. "You want to see my family? I got the beautiful family in Kentucky, where I come from." Pulling out a folded piece of paper, he said, "Here they is." He handed his candle to Harrison and opened up the paper, real careful-like, square by square, until he held the whole piece open, and I could see what was inside. I had to swallow hard when I saw it. 3 knots of black folks' hair lay in that white paper. Looked like it was a page from a letter or book, folded and folded, and in the middle of all those fancy words, the black folks' hair lay there like 3 lost rings. "Well, this is my wife, Nancy," Ordie Lee said, pointing to the darkest ring. "Most pretty woman in the world. And these are our babies, Isaiah and little Moses." Softly he traced his fingers around the 2 smallest rings. "Moses was just born in the spring. Got lungs like Bella's. And Isaiah, he's just walking when I went to my master and—" Ordie Lee's voice caught and stopped. He looked at us, his eyes blinking fast. "When you went to your master and did what?" Harrison said, holding up Ordie Lee's candle and squinting at him. Ordie Lee folded up the piece of paper without saying a word and stuck it back in his coat. Then he cast his eyes quick around the car and over his shoulder, like he was expecting something to come out of the shadows. "When you what?" Harrison said again. Ordie Lee cracked all his knuckles and twisted his hands together. "Well, when I brought a shovel down on his head," he whispered, "and I tried to kill him. What? Harrison stared, and I could feel the blood drain right down to my feet. Orderly had gone after his own master? He had taken a shovel to White Man? There was no trouble worse than that. Orderly's hands knotted and unknotted themselves. Well, I took a shovel and I hit him. Run. Run, they says. Run. I run all night. They looked back just... I never looked back, just run. He reached in his coat for his folded up paper again and held it out toward us. He was going to sell off me from them. My Nancy and Isaiah and Moses, he said, tapping his fingers. Why would somebody do something like that? That's what I kept on saying. Why? Orderly's voice trembled. The day they was planning to take me away from them, I just raised up the shovel. Raised it and brought it. Orderly took a step backwards, staring wide-eyed at us. I'm going to go back from my own side of the car and I'll lie down, he said fast. Do appreciate meeting you. And he shuffled into the darkness, bumping and stumbling into the barrels, leaving his candle behind. Harrison stared at the flickering candle in his hands. White wax dripped all over his fingers and onto the floor. We'd been stuck inside a full whiskey car, and trouble, Samuel. He shook his head. Snow outside, trouble inside. All night, me and Harrison sat in the car waiting. Then morning came, and the car started moving. I was asleep on the floor when I caught a sharp smell of burning wood. I lifted up my head and looked around for Harrison. In the gray shadows outside, there was a loud bell ringing and someone's voice calling out. Harrison, I said, sitting up fast. Something wrong? Harrison was over by the wall of the car with his eyes pressed against the chinks of the wood, trying to see out. Can't see nothing, he whispered, turning around with wide eyes and with fear. Only thing is I smell smoke. The car jolted forward and back. All of a sudden, Harrison tried to reach for the side of the car and fell against the stack of barrels. He groaned and put his forehead down in his hands. Orderly! I hollered. As the car began to sway and rumble forward, Orderly came flying out of the shadows from the back of the car, going from one barrel to another, holding on. You calling for me? He said, looking around with wide eyes. Something done happened while I was sleeping. Harrison was on his hands and knees trying to get himself up. Ain't you never been on a railroad car before? Orderly hollered over the noise. You got to just hold on to something here. He reached for Harrison. You just take a hold of my arm. Me and Orderly pulled Harrison to a stand. Around us, the car swayed and shook like thunder, going faster and faster. Whiskey sloshed back and forth in the barrels. My heart roared in my ears. We on fire? Harrison hollered. Nah! Orderly shook his head and waved his hand at the front of the car. They's burning wood up there in that iron horse, making clouds full of smoke and soot. Come after noon, you'd be tasting like them ashes in your mouth, believe me. Harrison looked toward the door of the car. Light flashed through the chinks of the wall, on and off, making thin stripes of lightning across our face. Felt like we was headed straight into the gates of hell itself. How fast we going, you think? Harrison asked. Fast, Orderly hollered. No old horse or wagon keep up with us, that's for sure. Unless it had wings. Chapter 30. Going north. All day, the whiskey car stopped and started at places that we couldn't see. More places than I could count, just like August said. We heard people walking past and barrels being rolled and loaded. Me and Harrison Orderly stayed crouched down in the back of the car each time we stopped, in case somebody opened the door, but no one did. When we were moving, Orderly almost wore out his floor. Pacing back and forth, he talked and cracked his knuckles and tapped his finger on each of the barrels. He told us about all the cars he had been on since running off. Pork barrel car, a lumber car, a baggage car, and this one. Didn't breathe a word again about his master or what he had done. Trouble is, he said, you don't know what direction the car is going in when you get in. So, one went west instead of north. Another one went south and took me all the way back to Cincinnati. Probably would have took me to the fields to pick cotton, he chuckled, if I hadn't been watching close. And another just sat on the tracks and never did move. This one's going north to the lake. Harrison told us. That's what we heard in Hillsboro. Huh, Orderly said, chewing on a piece of straw. Well, we'll see about that. Maybe we open the door and it's New Orleans. Harrison said that the cotton fields of the south were dead hot, and if we were going south, the car would be getting hotter and hotter and hotter inside, and we would know it. The wind coming through the chinks of the car was cool, cold almost, when we were moving, and it smelled like pastures and fields outside, so Harrison said he was sure we were heading in the right direction, north. But Orderly kept on worrying and walking all day. Thought you said someone was going to come for us and let us out. When they supposed to come? He said, for the 100th time. We've been on this railroad all day. Where's the lake gone to? Didn't matter how many times Harrison told him that we had to wait until dark. Each time the car came to another stop, Orderly would ask, "You think this is come to the lake yet? We think Canada is right out there now?" Me and Harrison kept on our own side of the car, sitting there in the rumbling darkness. I tried to think of Canada, tried to conjure up a picture of people waiting there for us, the way people wait for visitors. "What you think it's going to be like?" I asked Harrison. But Harrison closed his eyes and said it was bad luck to talk about things before they happened. I remember young Mass Seth showing me a silver coin once and telling me that I had to chase him all over, trying to take it away. It seemed like Canada was the same as that silver coin. We had chased all over, and now we had almost caught it. I tried to picture what Canada would look like, tried to picture myself living in a real house and walking around calling Harrison my granddaddy. Or maybe we would live in Chatham with my mama, if she had a spare bedchamber. And maybe if I was free, I could get up in the mornings and do what I wanted to, just like Mass Seth. I could carry one of them fancy white folks' books in my hands and have a mule to ride and learn to write words like Mr. Keephart. Strange to think about all that. It made me feel kind of scared and pleased inside at the same time. "Car slowing down," Orderly whispered, loud. "Listen." The rumbling deepened and lengthened like a horse in a slow gallop. After a string of jolts and pulls, we came to a stop. Only this time, we didn't move again. The bells stayed silent, and one by one, the voices outside all died away. Seemed like an hour passed, maybe more. It was night outside, and we could tell because the car was pitch black inside. We heard an owl hooting and a pair of tomcats fighting and clawing. "If this ain't the heights of madness," Orderly said, lying down next to us, flinging his arms over his face. "They ain't gonna let us out. We gonna shrivel up and die in here locked up." Harrison didn't say a word. His rigor mortis had set in bad from being on the hard floor all day. He was leaning against the wall with his head down onto his chest. I could hear him whispering the words to the same song over and over. "Lord, Lord, Lord," he mumbled. "What you wanna me to stay here for? This old world ain't no friend no more, no friend no more. What you want me to stay here for?" And then there was a soft sound of footsteps coming around the car. My heart thudded. The latch on the door moved, rattled, and the door creaked a little ways open. I could hear the sound of someone leaning in and breathing. "Tooey! Tooey!" The person whistled real low. He sounded just like a night bird whistling. But before me and Harrison could whistle back, Orderly jumped up and said loudly, "We here! Don't go and shut the door! There's 3 of us colored folks in here!" "Lord Almighty!" Harrison hissed, "Hush now!" It didn't matter because whoever was outside had already heard us. There was a long silence, as if they were waiting, or listening, or maybe thinking about shutting the door again and leaving us right there. "You runaways?" a hoarse voice finally said. It sounded like a white voice. We didn't have a single choice but to answer. "Yes," Harrison heaved a sigh. "We is." "All right," the voice said quickly. "Come out then." Sliding our hands along the tops of the whiskey barrels, we moved slowly through the darkness toward the door. First Orderly, then me, then Harrison. I could see the night sky and a few pale wisps of clouds through the open square. There were stars out, too. It sent a shiver clear through me. Everything looked exactly the same as in my dream in the white folks' church. I remember leaning over the hole of the church floor and staring at the same stars in the night sky. I remembered how Reverend Prime Mr. Keephart lowered Harrison into the open square, how he had floated away from me, spinning and turning and falling in that terrible darkness. I glanced quick at the shadow of Harrison coming behind me. His fingers curled around my shoulder. "Keep moving," he said, pushing me forward as if he could hear what I was thinking. "Ain't nothing wrong." But truth is, the nearer we got to the doorway, the more I could feel something wrong in my mind. I saw Reverend Prime Mr. Keephart shaking their heads, giving me that sad, sorry look. "Go on," Harrison whispered. My heart pounded as we climbed out of the car. Seemed like there was no ground at all, as if the three of us were just jumping into the darkness. "That all of you?" The man stepped out of the shadows of the rail car. He was a white fellow with hunched over shoulders and short, bowed legs. His voice was strange sounding, sharp. "Yes," Harrison said. The man shook his head and spit a stream of tobacco into the darkness. "Bad night to come here into Sandusky. Slave catchers, bloodhounds got on the loose. Killed 24 sheep outside of town 2 nights ago. You hear about that?" "What?" Orderly stared wide-eyed at the man. "Ain't this the North?" I shot a quick look at Harrison, not understanding at all how the slave catchers and dogs could be after us, not when we had come all this way. We had taken railroads fast as the wind. How could bloodhounds still be after us? The man chuckled real low. "You figured everything in the North is free and clear, huh?" he said, shaking his head back and forth. "Well, now, I'm purely sorry to tell you, poor folks, that you are in more danger here." He waved his hands in the darkness. "Than probably anywhere else you run from." He looked at us. Me, Harrison, and Orderly stood next to the whiskey car like we had been struck dumb by lightning. "See," the white fellow kept on, the lake's the last place they can pounce on you, take you back to the folks who own you. That's why. And there's always a bunch of hunters who watch our boats and make a living doing it." He pushed the door of the whiskey car closed. "Don't know what else would have killed those poor sheep if it wasn't some slave catchers' bloodhounds. I ain't seen the bloodhounds myself. That's just what I heard down in town," he said. "But the other boys on the boat told me not to come here tonight. They said I was going to get myself caught with runaways and torn up by dogs, and I should have just left the colored folks alone." The man spit in the darkness. "But I ain't afraid of nothing. That's what I told him. See if old Bowlegs doesn't smuggle a few coloreds on board this morning," I said. He gave a crooked grin. "I already got 31 of you folks to my name this year. You just follow me to the docks," he said, waving his arms for us to follow. "Ain't nothing to fear." Me, Harrison, and Orderly walked behind the man like 3 trembling shadows, not saying a word to each other, just hurrying from one stopping place to the next. All around us were rows of dark sheds, and the air smelled strange and heavy with fish. Orderly stopped suddenly. "You hear that?" he whispered, staring at us wide-eyed. Me and Harrison didn't wait to see what Orderly was looking at in the darkness. We just jumped into the shadows of one of the buildings and crouched against the wall. Then the sound started up again. It was a terrible creaking sound, like 100 old doors opening and closing, or the rattling sound of haunts old bones. My neck prickled with goose flesh. "Why'd you stop?" The white fellow came over to where we were hiding and looked down at us. "You want to have them bloodhounds find us?" he hissed. Orderly said he wasn't about to go nowhere with that sound. "Ain't you never heard wood boats creaking before? That's the sound they make," the man spat. He took a hold of Orderly's big arm and pointed up to the sky. "We got an hour or 2 before the first cock crows. I can't sneak you onto those boats till it's light. You just follow me. Like I told you, don't give me any more reason to stop." He hurried down the dirt path between the 2 buildings and ducked into an open doorway. "I can hide you in here," he whispered. The building smelled like rotten food. As we squinted in the darkness, I could see there were stacks of wood crate barrels, piles of stove wood, and some things that moved all around us. Small shadows ran along the walls. My heart thudded. Rats. But the man didn't pay no mind to the rats crawling around him. Perching on top of the barrels, he reached into his coat and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. "You never set foot on a big boat before?" he said, taking a big swallow and wiping his hand across his mouth. "You never saw the Mississippi?" Me and Harrison just stood where we were, not saying a word. It seemed as if I could feel those rats running up and down my skin. "I come from Kentucky," Orderly said loudly. "Took a little skiff across the Ohio River, but I didn't like all that water floating around me, no sir. Long time before Orderly crosses the river like that again. Long, long time." He paced back and forth, making little squares as he walked. "Well, you better get used to seeing some water," the man chuckled. "That lake you gonna cross could swallow 100 Ohio rivers, and probably still drink up a few more." Leaning his head back, he took a loud gulp of whiskey. "When a land disappears, you'll probably look like the Atlantic Ocean to you." Orderly stopped. "What? Where's the land gonna go?" he asked. "Well, where do you think?" The man wagged his head back and forth as if Orderly was as thick as turnips. "You think the land's behind you, and you don't see any more land until you get to Canada?" My breath caught in my chest. I remembered how Lily had always said, "When we go to the promised land someday, Samuel, we're going to leave this old tough world behind and not see any more land until we get up there in them clouds." "How far is Canada?" Orderly asked, nodding and unknodding his fingers. "How long we stay on them boats?" "Be there by evening with strong winds," the man said as he took another swallow of whiskey. "Long after nightfall if it's calm." "Lord," I heard Harrison say under his breath, "let those winds be strong." Through the open door of the shed, the sky grew lighter and lighter, like a piece of dark dyed cloth being washed. It was getting close to morning. All around us there was the sound of wagons creaking down the mud roads between the buildings. Barrels rolled past the doorway, and people talked in sharp, northern-sounding voices. But truth is, the closer we got to the break of day, the more my heart pounded. Trouble, trouble, trouble. Harrison cleared his throat and pointed to the door. "It time?" he said loudly to the man. The man rubbed his eyes and pushed his hat back on his head like he had been sleeping. "Well now, could be. But I done this trick 100 times, you know," he said slowly, his words running together. "All you does is you just roll a few of these flour barrels." He patted the side of the barrels he was sitting on. "To the Otter, same as the other colored fellas loading cargo, and you are as good as free. Nobody's going to stop you for working on the docks. I done this trick 1,000,000 times, 101 times. He put a finger to his lips. "Shh, just keep hid," he said, grinning at Harrison. "Old Bowlegs will have this little look around." Tucking the whiskey bottle in his coat, he staggered slow, swaying through the open door. After he was gone, Orderly whispered, "You think the three of us is going to be free today? You think we's going to get to Canada?" He drummed his fingers on the top of the wood barrel. "You think these barrels going to get us to freedom? You think that fella's telling us the truth?" "You hush," Harrison snapped. "4 people out there hear you." The man stuck his head through the doorway. "Roll those flour barrels right here," he said loudly. "Looks fine and clear. Let's load up the cargo, fellas." But I had a strange feeling as Orderly turned 2 barrels on its side and started pushing toward the door. Me and Harrison set our hands down, side by side, on one barrel. Orderly took the other. Looking down at our brown hands as the barrel on those flour barrels, I felt my throat tighten, squeezing tighter and tighter. "Hush," a voice whispered in my head. "Hush, someone's coming." "Don't have all day," the man said, waving. "Come on." Following the man back, we pushed the barrels out of the doorway and down the dusty road to the dock. The smell of fish and the sound of the boats creaking in the wind grew stronger. The road was full of people in carts and wagons. It seemed like we were in the middle of a river of moving things. As the barrels rolled into the thick wood planks of the dock, my heart thumped. "Why, we at the dock already? We this close to freedom after all this time?" The barrels rolled hard onto the uneven planks. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The sound was loud, too. Too loud. I kept my eyes down. Didn't look up at all the people passing around us, just their shoes, their fancy shoes. Old patch shoes, greased work shoes, boots. The boots moved in front of us and stopped. Orderly's feet stopped. "Get out your papers," a hard voice said to us. "Let me see 'em." Southern-sounding voice, boot heel hard. "Fast." Orderly's feet turned and spun around. They lifted off the dock, like two black birds taking flight, going to freedom, all by themselves, but not fast enough. Another pair of boots stepped behind us, and a white hand reached out and latched hard onto our arms. "If you run," the riverman had said, "they knows exactly who you are." Chapter 31. Haste will be your undoing. We were caught. As the white hand wrapped around my arm, I felt everything inside me crumble and turn to dust. Another thing left. The only thing left was my skin and my eyes. Everything else gone. All the way to Kentucky, me and Harrison had run and run. The Lord looking out for us the whole way, seemed like, and all the time he had known we were going to get caught at the docks where the boat left for Canada. That's what I kept thinking. He just let us run and run, knowing we was going to get caught at the very end, standing on the dock to freedom. Harrison's head dropped into his chest and his shoulders slumped over. I could hear him mumbling and whispering, "Bell, bell, bell, bell," as they tied his hands together with a piece of rope. "Cross your arms behind you," the man said sharp to Orderly. "Listen, Orderly, just listen, listen." "I said, cross them, boy." There was the sound of hand cracking across Orderly's face. He crumpled to the wood plank dock, and I heard the snap of rope as they knotted his hands behind him. "Lay down on the dock," they told me and Harrison, "and keep still." They tied our feet together with one piece of rope, same as if they were trying to tie up cord wood. "Hope you wasn't thinking of going nowhere." The one man leaned over us and grinned. He had a brown hat pulled low on his forehead and a chin stained yellow with tobacco. The other man had narrow, close-together eyes. Those eyes stared at us like two pieces of hard flint. "I'm going to hunt up the constable around here," he said. "If you darkies don't have free papers, they run off from somewhere, and I'll just hand them over to the jail till we find out where." He poked his boot toe at Orderly's leg. "You watch, Crane," he said. "This one will be worth some money here." The white birds cried overhead, and the boats creaked inside at the docks. People walked past us slow, like there was something to look at. I could hear voices talking around us. Strange to say, some of the voices sounded worried. "Oh, pity," I thought I heard. "What a pity." Lying on the dock, I stared at the seagulls wheeling and circling over our heads. I thought about Lily and all the trouble she had seen, and Harrison being caught and beaten for running off, and his wife, Belle, being lost forever in a card game. Thought about my mama being caught when she was a baby, and then being sold off and taken away after I was born. Seemed like all them black folks were standing in a long line in my mind, waiting for me to meet trouble, same as them. "Our hard times is over," they whispered, "but your hard times are all ahead of you." The man who had caught us paced back and forth, told people to move on, mind their own business. "Don't you have nothing better to look at?" he would snap. "Go on about what you were doing." Closing my eyes, I pictured me and Harrison turning ourselves into some of them white birds in the sky and just flying off into freedom. Pictured the people on the docks gathering around us, everyone watching us lift from the dock and fly away to Canada, just like a pair of white paper birds. And then, out of the clear blue sky, a small thought came to me. My eyes flew open. I turned my head and looked over at Orderly. He was lying next to me, his whole face twisted up with crying tears. "Orderly," I whispered. The boots shuffled further off, looking at something, not noticing. "Orderly," I hissed, but Orderly wouldn't answer. "Plan a way out," the riverman had said. "Haste will be your undoing." Heels echoed loud on the dock, coming closer. The sharp-eyed man had brought the constable, a big man with black hair and earlocks down to his chin almost. Smelled strong of onions when they leaned toward us. "Let them sit up," the constable said, leaning over and frowning at us. "They ain't sheep." I watched his eyes, the way they looked at me and Harrison and the orderly, lying there with our feet tied together and our hands behind us, and I saw something in his eyes. Maybe. "They can get themselves up," the man called Crane laughed and spit. "I ain't moving," Harrison whispered, turning his head to look away. "Go on, shoot me right here. All three of them are somebody's slaves. All three of them are somebody's slaves," the man with the sharp eyes said loud. "I know 3 runaway slaves when I see them. Probably $1,000 sitting right here." I knew dirt when I saw it, too. The 2 men who caught us were dirt. That's what I said in my mind. The constable heaved a sigh and tapped one loose plank with his foot. There were people circling all around us now, I could tell, and they were all quiet. It seemed like the air was holding its breath, waiting. "Sure they ain't got free papers put somewhere?" the constable said, slowly clearing his throat. "You ask 'em yet?" "They got nothing but their black skin," the man called Crane snorted, "and it ain't free. Anybody with eyes can see that." The constable sighed again and looked down at us, frowning. "Well, now," he said. Well, I saw the same thing I had seen before in his eyes, a flicker of something. "Look for weakness and plan a way out," the riverman had said. I tried my one thought, cast it up to the sky, just to see what would happen. "We got free papers," I said. "Truth is, we've been free for more than a year." The 2 men who caught us laughed loud, spit and laughed. "Listen to the boy! Listen to him going on!" The people standing around started whispering and buzzing among them. Sounded like bees. Sounded like a whole nest of bees. The constable grew more of a frown. "Well, all right then," he said. "Untie them and let me see them papers he's talking about." "Ain't no papers," the sharp-eyed man snapped. "Untie them." They took their time untying the rope around our feet and pulled us to sitting, mean as they could. I looked over at Orderly, hunched over beside me. He had his eyes closed. Blood and tears were dried on his cheeks. "It's in his coat," I said to the constable. "He keeps our papers folded up in his coat." Leaning over, the constable searched through Orderly's old coat himself, pulled out a leaf of tobacco, an apple core, and a half-burnt candle from the railroad, and the square of paper. "That's it." He held up Orderly's precious paper, and Orderly turned his head and fixed me with a mean stare, enough to turn my bones to powder. Figured I was bringing more trouble, probably. "That ain't nothing," Orderly said real low. "Ain't nothing." In my mind, I saw Green Murdoch holding up his fancy Will-O-Ware bowls and telling us how he had tricked an old woman into buying them. I thought about the fine smoked ham and the new tow linen shirt that wasn't new at all, and I looked straight at the constable and told a lie, as smooth as Green Murdoch himself. "You got our free papers, right there." Harrison turned his head and whispered, "Hush, Samuel. You awful smart for being colored boy." The man with flint eyes hissed, "I hope you knows what you're talking about." Looking up at him and thinking of Master Hackler, I felt that snake squeeze around my throat. Clumsy and impatient, the constable tore the paper open. "Just tear the whole thing to pieces," one of them laughed. "We won't tell a soul." Probably no one but Orderly, me, and Harrison saw those 3 little curls of hair slip out of the paper and drift away into the wind. Nancy, Isaiah, and Moses. A shiver went clear through me. If anyone found out he had tried to kill a white man because of them, we would all be dead. The constable held the paper open. Just an old scrap Orderly had stolen from a book or a letter. He glanced down at it and over at me, flicker in his eyes. The people on the dock moved closer, waiting. The whole line of black folks in my mind stood there, hushed. "What does it say?" the sharp-eyed man pushed. "They free or not?" The constable folded the paper carefully square by square, and gave it back to me. "What do you think?" he said, keeping his eyes down. "Says they're free." Chapter 32. Keep your eyes on the sun. On the same morning that we got free from the docks and rolled our flour barrels toward the Otter, my mama was sitting in Chatham, Kentucky with her in her little kitchen table. I looked up. She told me later, and plain as day, "I saw you there in my kitchen window. 3 boys were playing in the street, laughing and running, and one of them was you." I said to myself, "That is exactly what my Samuel looks like right now." And that's when I knew you was coming. Sure as anything in my mind, I knew it. But we didn't know any of that. As we got up real slow from the dock, the constable untied our hands and told us to get busy with our work, or we would find something worse for us. He would find something worse for us to do. So Harrison put his hands next to mine on that flour barrel, and I could see all his fingers trembling like leaves. And Orderly set his big, knuckled hands on the flour barrel, and we started rolling those barrels down to the dock. Seemed like everyone had their eyes on us, watching. They stepped back to let us pass. Parted the Red Sea, Lily would have said. The soft thump of barrels and the white birds calling overhead, filling the air around us. "Walk as if you have the perfect right to do so. You a slave, or you free?" "Free." "Then walk like it. Walk." Put my shoulders back, and I lifted up my head, and I took quick sideways glances at everything around us, and I saw the big sailboats lining the docks, one after another, and I saw people stopping in the middle of their work to stare at us, and in the spaces in between, I saw blue water, just like Lily had said, water that stretched all the way to the sky. "Flour goes on the Otter over here," somebody called out. We rolled the barrels up the long plank to the boat that was the size of a house. Maybe 2 houses. "We free?" Orderly whispered. "This mean we free?" All around us, the men tugged at curls of ropes and lines. The Otter swayed underneath our feet. It seemed like everything around us was being set free. Me and Harrison and Orderly stood where we were, not saying one word, just stood on the dock. Looked up as if our eyes and our mouths were stuck. Over our heads, the canvas sails of the Otter unrolled like warm summer clouds. And if we could have seen our future unfolding in those big sails, like my mama saw the future in her mind, we would have known what was going to happen to each one of us in freedom. We would have known that Orderly would become a blacksmith, the finest blacksmith in Chatham, Canada. He would call himself Isaiah Moses after his 2 sons. And although he would never see his family again, he would often bring us gifts of food and money, even a real horse one time. "Can't ever give enough," he would say, "for what you's done, Samuel." Then when Harrison got to Canada, he would find ponds scattered like seeds through the forest and fields around Chatham. He would choose one of his own to sit beside, and he would fish day after day until we all took to running from him whenever he brought home another stringer of pond fish for supper. If you ask anyone in Chatham today, they can still point you to Harrison's Pond, and it's always full of fish right down to the very bottom. And when I got to Chatham, I would find my mama sitting at her kitchen table, waiting for us. She would have extra places set because she just knew we was coming, today or tomorrow sometime. And when we walked through that door of hers, we would hear, sure as the whole town, the whole country in Canada heard, that Harrison was her daddy and I was her long-lost son. Only person that never could have freedom was Lily. Lily stayed with her children in the little Negro burying ground on Master Hackler's land. She's never going to leave, Harrison said, because that's where her family is. Each year, she would send a Christmas dollar to me, wrapped up in torn-out page of her Bible, and I saved all 6 of them. But truth is, we didn't know any of these things, not about Orderly or Harrison or my mama or Lily, or what was going to happen to us in freedom at all. We just stood on that deck of the Otter that morning. We just stared at the white sails, soaring in the endless morning sun. "Samuel," Harrison said, grinning to me, "we done it." He waved his arms, turning and spinning in the wind. "Woo-wee, Samuel," he hollered and waved. Look up at that beautiful free sky.